Peter writes, writing from Rome, Peter says, "Wherefore, laying aside all malice and all guile and hypocrisies and envies and all evil speakings, as newborn babes, desire the sincere milk of the word, that ye may grow thereby. If so be ye have tasted that the Lord is gracious, to whom coming as unto a living stone, disallowed indeed of men, but chosen of God and precious. Ye also, as living stones, are built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God by Jesus Christ." Now, I pity that Peter is, as far as I'm concerned, the patron saint of people like me who live with their foot stuck in their mouth. But here, right at the end of his life, Peter is a changed man. He has spent the majority of his adult life traveling around and preaching the gospel of Jesus. And here at this time of the writing of this epistle, he's in Rome, and he is about to be martyred. He's about to be nailed to a cross of his own and killed for the gospel of Jesus. But he's writing these things to churches to try to encourage them. But in Peter's writings, I think we can see a lot of the life experience that he has had up to this point, especially the experiences that he has had with Jesus. It just Peter's friendship with Jesus just is echoed all through his two epistles here. And I want to bring something to your mind here. Peter mentions stones a lot in this chapter. He compares Jesus to a living stone that was disallowed, meaning thrown away, basically, indeed of men, but chosen of God and precious. And he calls us living stones, which make up a house for God. Well, Peter kind of had, you've heard the expression said that fellow's got rocks in his head. Peter had rocks in his head in more ways than one. But I think this image of a stone must have resonated with Peter, because we find in the list of the disciples that we get in the Gospels, Peter is always one of the first mentioned. And in at least, I should have checked all of them, but in at least a few of them in those lists, it always mentions that he is Simon, who he surnamed Peter. See, Peter wasn't a name that this man had from birth. This was a nickname that Jesus had given him. His parents didn't call him Peter. This was Jesus' special name for this man, Simon. Peter, in the original Greek, coming from the word Petros, which means stone or rock. Now, to be honest, this was wishful thinking on Jesus' part when he first met Peter. Peter did not resemble, he was not exactly rock solid in those early days, but Jesus knew what kind of man he would become. Jesus knew what kind of man the gospel would transform this man named Simon the fisherman into. He knew that one day he would live up to that nickname that he had given him. That's why when we see Jesus asks his disciples, who do men say that I am? Some of them said, well, some of them say you're Elijah. Some of them say you're John the Baptist raised from the dead. No, but boys, who do you say that I am? And Peter, one of the few times he gets it right, says, you're the Christ. And Jesus says, and you're Peter. You're a rock. And upon this rock will I build my church. Now, not Peter, not the kind of guy you would want to build a church on at this time in his life. But Jesus knew what he would become. But you know what? If there was anybody, and this is good too, Petros, as opposed to Petrus, Petras, means foundation. Petros with an O means pebble. So Jesus says, upon this pebble will I build my church.
That's good.
You know, if anybody was qualified to turn a pebble into a foundation, it was Jesus.
Amen.
We read in Matthew chapter 13 that when he's preaching to the people in his hometown, they say, isn't this, the King James Version says, isn't this the carpenter's son? Don't we know who this is? We knew him from the time he was a little boy. Isn't this the carpenter's son? Well, that's the way it's translated in the King James Version. In the original Greek, that word is tekton, which can mean builder. And scholars have looked into this now, and they believe that likely, even though it's translated as carpenter here in our King James version of the Bible, that word should probably be translated more accurately to stonemason, because the place where Jesus lived there in Nazareth, wood was in short supply.
Right.
Probably 9 out of 10 buildings that Jesus and his earthly father Joseph would have built would have been made out of stone.
Oh, yeah.
So Jesus in Nazareth also located real close to a great big stone quarry. So likely Jesus had spent his boyhood and his young adulthood working and sweating and bleeding alongside Joseph as they chiseled stones and pieced them together to build walls and buildings and all these different structures. So when you take this into account, that Jesus probably wasn't working so much with hammers and nails and wood, but with stone and chisels and mortar, this opens up, at least when I learned this, it opened up my understanding of a lot of different scriptures. Think of it. Think how much more powerful it is when you have the son of a stonemason saying, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will build it again. And then those religious leaders buddy said, Jesus, we've seen your work. It's good, but I kind of doubt you could build an entire temple in 3 days. It opens up your understanding when Jesus, quoting the psalmist David, says, the stone which the builders rejected, the same has become the head of the corner. Jesus had set a lot of cornerstones in his days as a mason. Also, when Jesus says, getting back to what he said to Peter, if he is the son of a stonemason, when he says, upon this pebble will I build my church. That is a bold claim for any stonemason to make. But if there was ever somebody qualified to make that claim, it was Jesus.
A model like this.
Peter was rough material. You know it? From the first time that he meets Peter, when he goes onto the boat and he does that great miracle where the net is drawn full of fish, Peter's first reaction is to go, Lord, depart from me. I am a sinful man. Peter, given to anger, we see him in the Garden of Gethsemane as they're coming to take Jesus. He's the one that whips the sword out and cuts that guy's ear off. Peter, not incredibly brave. Right after that, when Jesus is taken to his trial, Peter follows him, but he doesn't acknowledge who he is. He denies Jesus. We know he even cusses to prove that he ain't hanging out with Jesus. Peter, not incredibly brave. But you know what? That stonemason, that great stonemason Jesus, over time chiseled off all those rough edges that Peter had. Now, writing from Rome, Peter has made it all the way from that little fishing village in Galilee. Oh boy, let me tell you what, when Whitney and I went to Rome a couple years ago, they have this big statue of him outside St. Peter's Basilica, and I thought, boy, you are a long way from that little fishing village. Here he was in what was then the center of the entire world. This is where the world was run from, Rome. This is where Caesar lived. And Peter, this humble little country boy who grew up on a fishing boat, had made his way there to preach the gospel of Jesus. Well, as he's writing this thing, he looks out his window, no doubt, and he sees building after building comprised of thousands and thousands of stones. And he must have thought back to that stonemason that he'd run around with, Jesus. He must have looked at those thousands and thousands of stone that still comprise the city of Rome today. And he must have thought about how, when they were pulled from the ground, not one of them would have fit together right. But because of the hand of a builder who chiseled them down and fit them together and slathered them with mortar and set them in an order that would stand up, they were able to form these structures that we still can go and see today in the city of Rome. Right? And thinking about those buildings, Peter must have thought about the thousands of people that he saw as a result of the preaching that he did come to Jesus. The men and the women and the boys and the girls of all these different nations and of all these different tongues, you can read about it in Acts, of all these different religious backgrounds, finding hope and finding peace and finding salvation in Jesus Christ. People from all over the world, you read in Acts, came to know Jesus through the preaching of Peter. He must have thought about how different they all were before they knew Jesus. But this great builder, this great stonemason, Jesus, had fit them all together, as he says here, as living stones in a house built for God. None of them would have fit together on their own.
No.
But for the hand of a builder. That's what he's saying here. Laying forth all malice, all guile, all hypocrisies and envies and even evil speakings. If we want to come together as a church, we have to be as newborn babes and desire the sincere milk of the word.
Wow, yeah.
But you know, there's something else that's required if you're hoping to build a structure that will last. Even the best builder can't construct a building made of stone without first laying the cornerstone. Yeah. That was the first step. On any project. They would lay the cornerstone, because if you know anything about masonry, and I don't know a whole lot, but I know this much, that cornerstone determines the orientation. It determines the layout of the entire rest of that structure.
Right.
You base everything else you do off of that cornerstone. Right. And as Jesus said, that cornerstone that was once rejected, that stone that was once pulled out of the quarry, and they looked at it and said, this ain't good for nothing. It's become the chief cornerstone.
Yeah,
later on in this chapter, Peter says of Jesus, a stone of stumbling, a rock of offense, even to them which stumble at the word, being disobedient, whereunto also they were appointed. It wasn't just a cornerstone for this building, but a stumbling stone. What did he mean by that? Well, see, these people had built their entire hope. The Jews that he was preaching to had built their entire hope on the law. Yeah. But here comes Jesus, and he says, you can't make it on your own. You can't do on your own. You can't please God on your own. It's only through my sacrifice and my blood. Jesus upset their whole idea of how God was. And it's a hard, let me tell you, it's a hard thing. It's a lot easier to trust in your own actions than it is that of somebody else. It's a whole lot easier to try to make yourself, even though we know it's impossible, it's a whole lot easier to trust your own work than it is to say, I trust somebody else to be righteous for me. So the cornerstone didn't just provide the orientation and the layout for this building, but it provided a stumbling stone for those who were trying to make it on their own. Yeah. Peter would have been the first to admit. Would have been the first to admit, and he admitted several times that he wasn't worthy to be included in this spiritual house made up of living stones.
Yeah.
Peter was angry. Peter was impulsive.
Yeah.
Peter was occasionally foul-mouthed. Peter was a racist, as we can see in the story that I read from here a couple weeks ago about Peter and the centurion. Peter had a lot of rough edges when he came to Jesus.
Right.
But he aligned himself to that cornerstone.
Yeah.
No matter what happened, Peter kept coming back to the cornerstone.
Yeah.
And aligning his life with it. And we see what great work he was done. Yeah. Though he had a lot of rough edges, there was a master builder.
Yeah. Who
through care and time and a whole lot of work.
Oh, yeah.
Made Peter fit in.
Amen.
Now the church was under immense pressure at this time. There was a Caesar on the throne at that time by the name of Nero. And you can read history about what kind of man Nero was. The city of Rome burned under his rule, and conspicuously didn't affect his house. Burned everybody else's, but it didn't affect his house. You've probably no doubt heard that Nero fiddled while Rome burned. Showed no compassion for his people. Yeah. He blamed this great fire in Rome on a young religion called Christianity who claimed their king was a crucified Jew from some backwater. And people bought into it. People thought Christians were atheists, weirdly enough, in that time, because we denied all the gods of the Romans. They thought we were cannibals because we claimed that we drank the blood of Jesus and ate his body in taking communion. They thought, they accused them of having loose morals, let's say, because they called each other brother and sister. All kinds of awful rumors. You can find, they made fun of Christians because they served somebody that had been crucified. There was no lower death in the Roman Empire than crucifixion.
Yeah.
Nero, this awful, evil ruler, burned Christians alive at the stake in his palace to provide light for his garden. Nero rather, had them fed to wild animals in the Colosseum. All kinds of awful stuff he did to these people called Christians, all because he needed a scapegoat. But you know what? The building that Jesus had built, the cornerstone that he had laid, and those living stones that he fit together, although the pressure was immense, the building stood. Although the storm raged against this house of God that had been built from living stones, people who wouldn't have fit together when they were pulled out of the ground, but shaped and tended by the loving hand of the builder Jesus.
Right.
Although the storm was great, the building stood. And the building still stands. And the building still is being expanded. Whitney and I were driving through somewhere the other day, and she said, "Look at that house." And evidently somebody had a house. It looked like it had started off as a double wide, and you could tell which way their property line ran because they just kept adding to. They expanded the house, but they didn't expand to the front or the back. They just kept extending to the side. And the side and the side and the side. And they had gone until they got to the side of the hill and couldn't expand no more. And like the quality of the workmanship got worse and worse and worse as you went on. You could tell they had spent less money and less time as they went on. It was the weirdest looking house I'd ever seen. But this house of God's still expanding.
Right.
This house of God, construction still ongoing.
Right.
Still as strong as it ever was. As we said, the blood that gives us strength from day to day will never lose its power.
Yeah.
This church still built from unworthy stones. Still built from stones that don't fit together, if not for the touch and the care of the master builder.
Amen.
I was not worthy to be included in the building. I was a living stone that wouldn't work in the arrangement. But God, through time, just like Peter has, and I'm still getting shaped. I'm still getting chiseled. I'm still getting tended to. And sometimes he's got to come back and slap a little bit more mortar on me to keep me in place. But just like Peter, no matter how rough the stone is when it starts, fits us all together to make a structure that, as Peter says here, a spiritual house, a holy priesthood to offer up spiritual sacrifices. That's the whole goal of this thing, to offer sacrifice, to offer spiritual fruit for Jesus. So, to wrap up, to bring this home for us. Not one of us. It's the one true thing that the enemy ever tells us. The one true thing that he ever says. You're not worthy.
Right.
He's right.
Yeah.
That is the one true thing he has ever said. That is the one thing that he ever told me that was the absolute truth. Zack Harold, you're not worthy to be included in this household of God. And for a long time, I agreed with him and said yes, and I felt unworthy. But then finally one day I said, yeah, that's right. I am unworthy. But there's somebody working on me that can make me work.
Amen. Yeah.
We can try and try and try, and a lot of people do, to shape ourselves.
Right.
But I've never seen a stone shape itself into a... I've never seen a brick make itself. I've never seen a wall construct itself.
Right.
It requires the hand of a builder.
Amen.
And I'm glad I've got the best in the business shaping me.
Yeah.
Turn with me. I don't know what page it is in the book. Let me look at it. 242 in your little book.
Stand, church.
In times like these, you got to have a rock. You got to have a cornerstone.
Amen.
In times like these, you need a Savior. In times like these, you need an anchor. Be very sure. Be very sure. Your anchor holds and grips the solid rock. This rock is Jesus. Yes, He's the one. This rock is Jesus, the only one. Be very sure. Be very sure. Your anchor holds and grips the solid rock. Third verse. In times like these, I have a Savior. In times like these, I have an anchor, and I'm very sure. I'm very sure. My anchor holds and grips the solid rock. This rock is Jesus. Yes, He's the one. This rock is Jesus, the only one. I'm very sure. I'm very sure. My anchor holds and grips the solid rock. You can be sure if you're not sure tonight.
Amen.
If you're not sure, this altar is open and you can get sure.
Amen. All you gotta do is ask.
In times like these, you need a Savior more than anything else.
Amen.
In times like these, you need an anchor. So be very sure. Be very sure. Your anchor holds the solid rock.
Did you enjoy that, church? I really did. I really enjoyed it. Anytime I can learn something. Now, I've learned a lot tonight, Jakey. I really appreciate that. It was really good. Zach, I appreciate it. James, would you come?